Welcome to Biblios, the space where we think about biblical thinking. Today we have the privilege of discussing prophecy.
Dr. Knight, welcome again.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Knight, I remember reading stories of how the early Adventists would maybe stand on a street corner and unveil a chart.
That's right.
And on that chart would be a picture of, maybe for example, the statue in Daniel chapter 2, and they would use the chart and point to it and talk about the things that have been and the things that were to come.
They didn't have projectors back in those days, and they didn't have, these little computer screens, and so they had to use a chart. That was the technology of their day.
It was. Today you may see maybe an Adventist doing a similar thing with a PowerPoint slide, for example. Right. And so I'm wondering, why is prophecy so central or important to Seventh-day Adventists?
I suppose the most important reason is that historically we are rooted in prophecy. We came out of a prophetic movement, particularly the books of Daniel and Revelation. Those two books have done a great deal to identify us as Seventh-day Adventists.
I suppose there's many different views about what is going to happen sort of at the end of time.
Yes.
So I suppose I'm wondering, should our focus not be on what we do while we wait rather than what is yet to come or the prophetic?
Well, maybe it's not an either or. We talked some weeks back about history. The Bible has two types of history. It might be said that way. It has past history and then future history. What's going to happen at the end of time? We call that prophecy. And of course, prophecy as future history started way back, at least apocalyptic prophecy, started way back in Daniel and runs up until the second coming of Jesus, particularly portrayed graphically in the book of Revelation. One of the reasons there's different understandings of prophecy is there are different perspectives. Some people don't believe in prophecy. Prophecy was written after it happened, and it's all about Nero and things that happened in the first century. Other people are futurists. They say, no, it's all going to happen right before the end of time. But probably the best clue to understanding prophecy is the prophecy of Daniel 2. It starts out in the time of Daniel. It goes through the four great ancient empires. Then it goes through the modern Mediterranean European complex and says that you can't put these things back together again. They won't stick together. And then suddenly at the end of time, you have a little rock cut out without hands, and it's the second coming of Jesus. In other words, the prophecy of Daniel 2 sets the tone. It's the first prophecy of Daniel, and Revelation builds upon the symbolism of Daniel. And so you've got a prophecy running through continuous history all the way from the time of Daniel up through the ancient pre-Christian empires, up through the Mediterranean complex, that same territory, up until the second coming. Continuous historical fulfillment. And then the next great apocalyptic prophecy, Daniel 7, has basically the same outline. But in Daniel 7, it's from the perspective of a people being persecuted. It's about beasts that rip and tear. And then in Daniel 8, you get the same basic history, except this time it's sacrificial animals, lambs and goats and sanctuaries. It's from the perspective of God's people. And then, of course, you get the final prophecy, and that is Daniel 11 and 12, and it builds upon the same outline. And then Revelation comes along, particularly the second half, the apocalyptic half, and apocalyptic has to do with the second coming events. And it builds upon the symbolism, particularly after the little book of Daniel is opened in Revelation 10. The book of Daniel 12:4, was sealed until the end of time. Revelation 10 opens it, and after it's open, you have an explosion of Daniel's symbols. And so Revelation builds upon Daniel and shows us what's going to happen, particularly as we move towards the end.
That's really interesting, Dr. Knight. I guess one of the questions I have is, how focused on prophecy should I be? Is it simply enough just to know that in the end, God wins and Jesus is coming? Or do I need to spend all my days looking at prophecy, trying to work out what's going on? How do I relate to it today?
Well, I would say that one ought to be balanced. And we ought to see prophecy in terms of Jesus and his work down through history rather than through the beasts. I've known people who focus on the beast and they start acting like beasts. You know what I mean? and they forget all about the Lord of the beasts. Prophecy is about Jesus Christ and him coming again. The beasts are the earthly powers who've tried to stomp out and hinder God's people and hinder God's message. But it's all about Jesus. It's all about the gospel. So I'm going to say this. When I preach on prophecy, I try to make Jesus the center.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, are the beasts important? Yeah, because that's what history's all about. Beastly governments. We've seen plenty of beastly governments. I was born in 1941. That was a wonderful time to see beastly governments, but I couldn't appreciate it fully. With Hitler and Stalin and all the dynamics, and, well, you can probably figure out some of the beasts today, but anyway. History has been disruptive of God's mission and the preaching of the gospel message. Yes, I should have an interest in prophecy. Why? Because God put it in the Bible. The revelation, if you read that first couple of verses, is the revelation from Jesus, the revelation about Jesus. Jesus is the center of prophecy. But if you want to understand Jesus, you better not just stick in Daniel and Revelation, right? You better read the Gospels, you better read the epistles, you better read the Old Testament history, because prophecy is built upon these things. You can become a prophecy nut. I've seen a lot of prophecy nuts. They're off center. But you're also off center if you never move beyond the life and death of Jesus. Because the Bible provides an entire picture of Jesus from his prehistory, creator of the world, and he was with his Father before he came to this earth, the incarnation, the life of Christ, the death of Christ, the book of Hebrews, the heavenly ministry of Christ, and Christ coming again. A balanced Christian ought to be growing in an understanding of all those periods of his existence and what they mean for our faith. To focus just on prophecy is a big mistake. To focus without prophecy is a big mistake. God gave us all the parts of the Bible, and for a full understanding, you need to have all the parts.
So it's not that I read the Gospels, understand the Gospels, and once I've got those out of the way, I move on to prophecy and like the real stuff. Am I focusing on everything at the same time, or is it prophecy just for like super Christians?
Well, I'm going to tell you, if I had my own perfect world on how to make well-developed Christians, which is not the way it works, I would say, I want you to meet my friend Jesus. And he just didn't come out of anywhere. I mean, I'd tell them about Abraham and some of the Old Testament stories and about Paul. You know, Jesus talked about he's coming again, and the great apocalyptic teaching in Matthew 24 and 25 and Mark 13 and Paul's little apocalypse over there in the Thessalonians, that they're all focusing on this, and it's building up to a climax. And now we're going to study prophecy. Usually it doesn't happen that systematically. But even if, I came into Christianity through a series of messages on Daniel and Revelation. I needed it because I said, wow, the Bible is rooted in history. That's really neat. And I needed that because I grew up in the 40s and 50s. The 50s were a very skeptical age. And it was important for me to see that these prophecies really matched what happened in history. But that turned out to be a little bit of a problem for me because I got too much prophecy and not enough Jesus, and I had to get back and work through it backwards.
It's interesting that you make that point about sort of prophecy and history. What do you see the role of prophecy being sort of within the Adventist church? One of the things you said is that maybe it sort of helped to confirm the authenticity of the Bible.
An objective confirmation of faith is certainly one of them. But it also gives us a very broad guideline of what we're still looking forward to as we move towards the eschaton, or the second coming of Jesus. And what happens after that, which is really exciting. I create a new heavens and a new earth, and there's not going to be more sickness, death, sorrow. How many times have I read that next to a person that's dying? I said, next time I see you and you're going to open your eyes. I have a practice. I always get permission of the family first. When I preach a funeral sermon, I wear a red striped shirt and a red tie. Why should I wear a black tie and go like I'm in mourning when this is a Christian that's lived a successful life? No, man. In fact, I had a Hawaiian lady die not too long ago, and I told her, look, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to wear my Hawaiian shirt and my sandals. It ought to be a time of rejoicing. I want to see, if you're dying, man, and you've lived a good Christian life, I can look you in the eye and I can say, next time I see you, you're going to have a new body. to go with your new heart. And we're all going to have new bodies. And we're going to know Jesus. And that body's not going to deteriorate next time.
Why doesn't prophecy sound as hopeful as what you were just saying? Because a lot of the time you can read and think about prophecy and it end up scaring you.
Dragons, beasts.
Or-
Well, certain hellfire groups, let's just say Southern Baptists in the United States, they tried to scare people into sanctification. You want to scare people out of hell? I think some Adventists have kind of used that too. Not with hellfire, but Jesus is going to come and get you. You know, I can still remember I was a young soldier and I went to church with this girlfriend. There was an old lady up there. She must have been 40 years old. And when you're 18, 40, that's really old. She had long, bony fingers. And she said, you better stay awake every night. She's telling this to a bunch of teenagers. And think of everything you've ever done wrong. And you better confess every one. Because if you miss it,
That's it for you.
you're going to go to the hot place. And that had to do with the second coming. And only read the Bible. The judgment is always for God's people. They can hardly wait for it. How long? How long? The judgment is the vindication of God's people. He's justified in our resurrection. We've accepted his sacrifice, changed our heart. We've walked with him through the Holy Spirit. And wow, we need to get this straight. The gospel is good news. We have made it bad news. And we use prophecy to do it.
So tonight it's been fantastic having you here with us.
Thank you for joining with us as we discuss prophecy. If this has created any thoughts or ideas for you, we would love to hear them. You can see some of our previous episodes up here, and we'd love to see you again with us next time on Biblios, the space where we think about biblical thinking.